Yellowstone, the supervolcano, the ultimate eruption that's waiting to happen. When we go on day trips, on field trips, we see various times things like the Grand Canyon, mounds of very thin, soft pumice stone, and we're wondering, yards in height, tens of yards, hundreds of yards in height, whole mountains, and we're wondering how these things were ever formed. A lot of these are basically volcanic ash. That's frightening when you come to think of the fact that they were formed due to eruptions of volcanoes and supervolcanoes. This is on Science 101 by Tyler Brown. He has a number of volcanoes worldwide, but we're going to talk about what happened with the Yellowstone supervolcano and how it's predicted again to erupt. Others say sooner, others say later. In the meantime, geologists are always finding something new underneath. Volcanoes are fascinating, but they're deadly, and many of us don't live with the fear that they may ruin our livelihoods, our lives. Others do, of course, but these few small volcanoes threaten us. There are others that are so massive, so worthy of awe, they threaten all of us worldwide. The Yellowstone supervolcano is one of these. Among the many facts about this volcano, the disturbing fact is that it could be ready to blow every 640,000 years or so, and even more recently, 70,000 years ago, 640 was the super eruption. 70,000 was a smaller one. So it can blow. It blows its lid, and now it's due for another blow, another eruption. So let's see what would happen when this volcano does explode. In one of my previous videos yesterday, I posted the fact that there is an agreement in place by the US government for mostly countries of the southern hemisphere, because once Yellowstone erupts, it's expected that the northern hemisphere would be so full of ash that it would be very difficult to live. And let's remember, it's not just the plants and animal life that will be disrupted, because it will be a tremendous amount of ash, tens of feet on the ground, but it's also what it does to our health, and what it does, for example, immediately to our lungs. So that's why they have an agreement in place to take Yellowstone evacuees to countries of the southern hemisphere. And the first set of that 10-year agreement expires 2024. So they're rolling those agreements. 2024 is the first time that one expires, and they expect to have it rolling on, and they pay tens of billions of dollars for those agreements, by the way, to relocate Yellowstone evacuees. That's frightening, but at least they're doing something about it. Thank God they do have an agreement. Somebody could be saved that way. Now, we even have NASA coming up with various ideas as to how they can mitigate, how they can lessen the energy of an explosion. One would be by drilling and placing nukes in order to alleviate the pressure, release the pressure. Another would be drilling and placing freezing materials to freeze the magma chamber somehow, to cool it so it doesn't. Again, these, of course, could be very dangerous, because while they're drilling something, they could be setting off the magma chambers, and will have an explosion, an eruption sooner than later. So that has a lot of risks on its own. But what is the anatomy of this volcano? Well, to understand the peril imposed on us by Yellowstone, we have to understand what volcanoes actually are. Essentially, a volcano is an area of the earth where magma and pressure are building up. There's a magma chamber where molten rock lies beneath the layers of the Earth's crust. And these volcanoes form when either two of the Earth's tectonic plates separate or drive beneath one another. This is a case that we have in Yellowstone. It is on the Ring of Fire, and they have, of course, already seen with 3D examinations that there is a large slab of the Pacific plate lodged underneath the North American plate in the area of Yellowstone. And of course, next to Yellowstone, we also have the Long Valley caldera of California. Now, who knows if those magma chambers are connected or if they're just neighboring supervolcanoes. So, we have the Earth's tectonic plates separate or driving beneath one another, or that's what happens when a volcano takes place. It forms, or where there's a particularly hot spot beneath the Earth's crust. If one plate gets pressured beneath another, for instance, the rock that gets driven deeper will melt from heat and pressure, and this will cause the resulting magma to build and rise to the surface. One of the hot spots that we've seen lately, the fantastic footage is of the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii, and that was erupting for 2 or 3 months, and it's in a phase of pause now. And we have then, besides volcanoes, we have the supervolcanoes. A supervolcano is a certain type of volcano, a super type, because it will, when it erupts, emit a far more powerful explosion than your boring old simple volcano. For example, a simple volcano like, for example, Mount St. Helens was in 1980 when that erupted. The Yellowstone supervolcano is one of the terrible caliber of supervolcanoes. Is to be considered a supervolcano, the entity is to have had a history of huge, massive explosions. These have to rank high on what's called the Volcanic Explosivity Index, the VEI. The Volcanic Explosivity Index measures the caliber of each volcano in relation to others. Supervolcanoes rank heavy on the more explosive side of the index, ejecting enough ash and magma and rock to put the Earth into existential crisis. The Volcanic Explosivity Index is the VEI range from a scale of 0 to 8. Volcanoes at the 0 end are unexciting. For the most part, they don't show any signs of throwing the world into death and doom anytime soon. In essence, they don't have enough pressure to build up, and they aren't made of the appropriate composite materials and are all around just boring. Well, I don't count them as boring, but others do. Maybe it's because they expect to see a supervolcano. And volcanoes with a ranking of 8 are the opposite. When these explode, they can emit over 1,000 cubic kilometers, that is a chunk of material over 620 miles wide and deep in volcanic goodness, and that's a lot. And what's troubling about the Yellowstone supervolcano is that it has one of these explosions every 640,000 years or so, and it's overdue for another one. And we also have Huckleberry Ridge. Yellowstone has 2 notable eruptions in the past we saw in the past few million years. The first of these, which ranked an 8 on the VEI, was the Huckleberry Ridge eruption. While it may have at least intimidating name, this eruption blew roughly 11,000 football fields of material into the air, and this all happened around 2.1 million years ago. The debris and ash of this eruption can be found all the way from California to the contours of the Mississippi River. The result is responsible for forming Island Park in Idaho and Wyoming, and the explosion, needless to say, was quite big, spreading enough ash into the atmosphere to encircle the whole Earth. And you have Lava Creek, which is another of Yellowstone's frightful explosions, which happened 630,000 years ago. This eruption was similarly VEI 8, and again spewed enough ash into the air to cover the whole world. The amount of ash from this explosion, though, was enough to plunge the Earth into what scientists call a volcanic winter. So, in conclusion, this was, in reality, so much sediment in the environment that the sun's rays could not penetrate to the layers beneath. The amount of vegetation and other life that can die in the wake of a disaster like this is untold. Ultimately, the result of the eruption, such an eruption of V8, other than the havoc and the chaos and the tumult, was the peak's largest caldera. It left a hole where the volcano exploded. And then you also have pyroclastic flows, P-flows. There are several ways through which volcanic explosions can ruin and wipe out everything that we know of. One of the most salient of these is called pyroclastic flow. This pyroclastic flow is the thick smoke and sediment you see after a volcano explodes. It's not something you want to hang around to see because it goes so quickly. Also, this P-flow is full of all types of volcanic toxic gases, including microscopic sharp pieces of rock, the volcanic haze, the blaze, as they were saying. We saw a lot of that in the recent Kilauea eruption, and also temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, boulders blown from the volcano's peak. Flow will destroy pretty much everything in its path. Speeds can reach over 435 miles an hour. It goes as fast almost as a jet plane. Now, volcanic ash is a problem for those in the midst of the volcanic eruption, and we have maps here of the volcanic ash cloud that has covered previously the continental United States from the Yellowstone eruptions. This is bad for several reasons. First of all, the particles it contains have small shards of glass. But another worse problem is that this material can destroy the engines of cars and planes, and the amount of damage the ash can do depends on the type of material it's made of. And typically the more silica this type of material has in the ash, the worse it is. When sucked into the engine of a plane, for instance, the heat of the jet engine will exceed the melting point of the silica-based ash, and it will cause it to melt and ruin the engine. And if you'd like to remain airborne, you can see why it is not a good thing. And then, of course, it's a great problem to human health as well. This volcanic ash is what can damage our lungs permanently, if not cause the loss of life. Since the ash is both microscopically sharp and microscopically abrasive, macroscopically, it can cause numerous problems to our lungs and respiratory tract. One of these is called silicosis, a disease similar to what miners call black lung. Silicosis happens when the silica from the ash enters the nodes of our lungs, and what happens is it creates a unique breed of inflammation that leads to the formation of some ugly black fleshy growths. And if you've ever seen those in advertisements of people who smoke cigarettes, you know that black fleshy growths in the lungs are not good. Then you have the lahar. The consequence of volcanic explosion is the lahar. These lahars consist of snowmelt and other debris that aggregate en masse after the volcano erupts. And in essence, the heat from the volcano melts all that's around it, causing it to flow down the slope of the volcano at very high speeds. And we've seen this recently as well in the Latin American volcanoes. The power of the lahars can be great enough to rip trees from their roots, rocks from their rocky homes, from the mountains, of course, surrounding the people from their residences. And if you see a lahar making its way towards you, you have to get into your car and run as fast as you can. Now, the Hawaii eruptions, different types of levels of associated destruction with these. Yellowstone volcano is one of those in the more terrible end of the continuum, but first we'll start with the most innocuous, the Hawaiian eruptions. We've seen this, of course, we were lucky enough to see this from afar. in the Kilauea eruptions. These are mostly effusive, which means that their magma is made of sticky material. Because the magma isn't sticky, it can't build up enough pressure in the volcano to explode with the same ferocity of those like Yellowstone. So in reality, you need the stickiness to prevent the magma from just oozing out of the cracks and crevices of the rock. In the case of Kilauea, it was running like a stream of a river. A river. I mean, that's how fast it was. You would look at it and you would say, what is that, water? Then you have the Strombolian eruption. Strombolian explosions are more intense than the Hawaiian explosions, the eruptions, but still not all that exciting. They emit an incandescent and bright type of a magma when they erupt. And these volcanoes get their name from Mount Stromboli in Italy, an active volcano in Sicily in Italy. When they erupt, they shoot their projectiles to from 10 to a couple of hundred feet into the air. Now, Strombolian eruptions are only rated at 2 or 3 on the volcanic explosivity index. This means that they're not the most explosive. So if you're in the wake of these, you don't really need to worry yourself too much. It's probably just not a good idea to be close to any of these. So the Vulcanian eruption, the volcano of the Tyrrhenian Sea in Sicily, are characterized by dense plumes of ash that get ejected from the top once they explode. It's a lot of smoke, but not a lot of volcanic danger. The problem with these is mostly from the volcanic ash. Explosions, though, like Yellowstone, are, as we know, much worse. When it erupted, when its eruption was first documented, the Romans thought it was the vent opening from the smith god Vulcan. That's why they call it volcano, Vulcan. And this is undoubtedly not the case. So the explosion's volcano was a chaotic sight to see, and including the historians of the time who wrote about the vigor of the volcanic eruption. The Plinian eruption are the most severe, gaining a rank of 7 to 8 on the volcanic explosivity index of Plinian eruptions. There are also distinctions between Plinian and ultra-Plinian. Both are the most severe you can get. With ultra-Plinian equality, the supervolcano that makes up Yellowstone. The Plinian explosions are the most severe. They have the mass amounts of devastation, and they can go far off land. The explosions are thousands of times more deadly and destructive than, for example, Mount St. Helens or Krakatoa, some of the more famous eruptions of our recent past. This is why where we enter the destruction of the possible. Yellowstone supervolcano, the Plinian explosion. Mount St. Helens, we saw recently in 1980. Yellowstone is considered a supervolcano that will erupt in an ultra-Plinian fashion, and we can get a good understanding of just how devastating this explosion will be with a few examples. We'll start with Mount St. Helens. The volcano caused billions of dollars in damage in the nearby Washington area. The eruption in 1980 blew down all the trees within a 370-mile radius and also covered the entire Earth in the film of ash, and was considered the most detrimental and costly eruption in U.S. history. Mount St. Helens was only considered a 4 or 5 on the volcanic explosivity index. The explosion, though, of the pending Yellowstone volcano is going to be 10,000 times worse than Mount St. Helens. Krakatoa is another volcano that can give us a clue how detrimental Yellowstone will be. Krakatoa, just similar to Mount St. Helens, was not the highest on the volcano explosivity index. It was only considered to be around 6. But even a 6 as a blast could be heard from 3,000 miles away, and it also ruptured the eardrums of people within 40 miles of the volcano. Krakatoa eruption had an explosion considered somewhere around 4 times the most powerful nuclear bomb. And because of the density of people located around the volcano, which is in Indonesia, anywhere from 35,000 to 120,000 people died. But again, the Yellowstone supervolcano would erupt with 1,000 times more power, and millions of people in the vicinity would die. You also have hotspots. Yellowstone's fright-inducing volcano comes from what geologists say are hotspots. Hotspots are essentially just places beneath the Earth's crust that are very, very hot. So hot, in fact, that they melt the rock above to form magma chambers and other geological features of a volcano, for example, earthquakes and geysers. And in the case of Yellowstone, we have the Pacific Plate underneath the North American Plate, and that's where we have our magma chambers, and of course, a lot of this water that enters the area above the magma chambers becoming geysers. As tectonic plates move around the hotspots, the location of the growing volcano will move, and this movement is what's given us Yellowstone supervolcano. And beyond this dormant volcano is the hotspot responsible for Yellowstone's geysers. It's also, of course, as we know, the attraction for Yellowstone, especially Old Faithful, which goes off every couple of minutes, like clockwork. The tectonic plates on the crust of the Earth is a thin slice of what actually exists on the sphere of our Earth. This thin slice is made up of tectonic plates of the Earth's crust, which rest atop the rest of the Earth underneath the crust that rise above the sea. The continents of this, that is, varies it's about 25 miles thick, and the ocean plates are only about 3 to 5 miles in thickness. These tectonic plates are what are responsible for creating most of our volcanoes and mountains. The activity we see on our planet Earth, most of these plates collide and submerge and create volcanoes and earthquakes, mountain ridges. To get a better grip on how this works, you can get a deeper look at what goes on beneath the Earth's crust. The mantle of the Earth flows right beneath the crust, and unlike the crust, though, the mantle is pressed from all sides to a point that makes it hotter, so that it remains molten and liquid, and the molten magma, called lava, when it's beneath the surface, is responsible for the formation of every one and each of the volcanoes that exist. Scientists believe the mantle to be around 1,800 miles deep, and from here the mantle turns into the outer core, which is about 1,400 miles thick and composed of nickel and iron, and also it's liquid from the heat and pressure of nearby rock. Beneath this is the inner core, which is the solid nickel and iron. In conclusion, Yellowstone is due for another explosion. It's set to blow with something far worse than Mount St. Helens and a little bit less than Mount Toba. What we can expect from this catastrophe? Well, a lot of pain and tumult, chaos, sound and fury, and it's hard to say what it will actually do, but the result will be impactful for those very nearby. Thankfully, we have scientists monitoring Yellowstone. We have an observatory there. We even have amateurs watching the live webcams that are casting whatever is there. So if it were to blow anytime soon, we'd know at least some time in advance. Hopefully the scientists would warn us and would tell us. Another plus is that Yellowstone is located in the area that is relatively unpopulated. As we know, it's in a park. Now, compared to Mount St. Helens anyway, so you can consider yourself a little bit safe that there's not people directly underneath it, as we have in other countries. For example, Italy, Latin America, even in Greece, even in Germany. We have a lot of the German mountains are themselves volcanoes and craters of volcanoes. I didn't even know that. I just recently found out. So Mount Toba, now the largest caldera we know of, came from a supervolcano erupting very close, 77,000 years ago. The explosion of this volcano is to have been so large that it plunged the entire Earth into a period of global winter. And this period of cooling lasted for something like 6 to 10 years, they say. I'll leave links below for you for this on Science 101. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.